I'm Fraser. I'm 18 now. I started when I was 14. And I'm going to hopefully quickly tell you my life story in the next 10 minutes. I'd say I've always been an entrepreneur, and from a really young age was involved in money-making projects. I think probably the earliest example of which was when I was about 8, and with the help of a couple of friends, baked some muffins, cakes and shortbread and sold them at the school bake sale. I think we made about 20 quid and gave the money to Greenpeace, but that was my first ever taste of enterprise. Following on from that, I developed an obsession with coming up with ideas, and probably the most harebrained of all was when I was about 10 and visited a farm with a friend. We got a box of eggs and I took them home and explained to my parents that I wanted to hatch them out and start a chicken farm in the back garden. Needless to say, my parents weren't very keen on that idea, but let me give it a shot, not expecting me to be successful. Anyway, I put the eggs on top of the Sky TV box where it was quite warm, and a few weeks later, 4 of the eggs hatched, which I raised in the back garden, and within a few months they were laying eggs, which I sold to the neighbours. So, unfortunately, my chicken farming career was sadly cut short when the local fox decided to eat my chickens for dinner. But as upsetting and tragic as that was, it didn't put me off entirely, and I continued to come up with more and more business ideas. For about a year, I sold bacon and sausages door to door for a local butcher, and that taught me a lot about sales and dealing with customers. I became certain that I wanted to start my own real business, and at the age of 14 decided to take the plunge. So it all started when my gran taught me how to make jam using her secret recipes. That's a picture of my gran there. She's the one in the middle. I started out making jam with my gran's recipes in the kitchen at home, selling them to the neighbours and later at church fairs, farmers markets and to local delicatessens. The local papers soon took an interest in the story of a young lad taking his gran's recipes and turning them into a thriving business. And that's an article from when I was about 15 in the Edinburgh Evening News. So following the excitement of being featured in the bastion of journalistic excellence that is the Edinburgh Evening News, and also having won a national award for enterprise presented to me by Gordon Brown, I decided to leave school and work full-time on my business. I was only 16 at the time, but I was completely sure that I could turn my jam-making hobby into my career. So I soon found myself working all day, every day in my parents' tiny kitchen, cooking up to 1,000 jars of jam a week. Needless to say, they were never getting into the kitchen to cook the dinner, and I soon had to come up with an imaginative idea in order to move production into a commercial setting. So I did a lot of research, and I discovered that sales of jam have been in decline for the past couple of decades, and that's mostly because jam's got a very unhealthy and old-fashioned image. Usually when people think of jam, they associate it with old women, church fairs and afternoon tea. So I set myself the ambition of trying to completely reinvent the world of jam by coming up with a healthier and more modern brand. Hundreds of batches and dozens of recipes later, I came up with the solution of using grape juice as a sweetener rather than refined sugars or anything artificial. And I soon had a few flavours that I thought tasted great, and probably naively decided that I wanted to supply them to the big supermarkets. This was something that no teenager had ever done before, and Channel 4 asked if they could follow me around for 6 months to make a documentary about it. So that added a little bit of pressure. So I was then invited to a Waitrose Meet the Buyer Day, which was kind of like the pop idol for selling products to supermarkets. And I was given 10 minutes of a senior buyer's time to pitch my idea. He said it was a fantastic idea, and he just loved the whole. And he said it was really refreshing to see a teenager coming along and trying to reinvent something that's been around for hundreds of years. But he said that there was a long way to go until I would have a product that was ready to sit on the shelves of Waitrose. I would have to set up production, create a brand, and do a bit more work on the recipes before he would be happy. And although there was a long way to go, he promised that if I did a good job of those 3 things, he would consider listing my jam in all of the Waitrose stores. So in the back of that meeting, I decided to put everything I had into trying to create a product the Waitrose would be happy with. And a lot of my mentors at the time felt that was a risky strategy. I was putting all my eggs in one basket just on the basis of one meeting with a supermarket. But supplying supermarkets was my dream, and I thought I could do it. So I was then studying accountancy full-time at university and began by trying to create the Superjam brand. So I contacted a whole load of design agencies trying to convince somebody to work with me cheaply. Needless to say, as a teenager, I didn't have access to vast sums of money, and the 20, 30 and even £40,000 quotes that many agencies provided me with were somewhat out with my budget. But I persevered and eventually came across a local ad agency who offered to work with me for free. They did that because they really believed that Superjam would be a big success and that they would benefit in the future from repeat business. There's obviously a link between Superjam and Superman, so the designers and I thought it would be really fun to create the branding around a comic book theme. We had a lot of fun writing the copy, and it excitedly spoke of creating a superhero-esque costume for me, the Jam Boy, to wear at the lunch of Superjam. So we then had a set of labels that I thought looked really cool, and I started to try and solve the slight problem of how I was going to produce hundreds of thousands of jars of Superjam to supply to the supermarkets. So I travelled around the country, from the tiny little islands off the north coast of Scotland to the big cities of England, trying to convince somebody to work with me to produce Superjam. Obviously, all the big companies were a bit sceptical of this teenager coming along with no capital, no experience, and in fact, little more than just a set of recipes and a vague ambition to change the world of jam. Eventually, I came across one factory who had suffered from the decline in jam sales and felt that Superjam was the answer to their problems. A few months later, we'd figured out how to produce the recipes on a big scale, and I believed we were ready to supply Waitrose. The buyer didn't agree. He explained to me that the fact that Superjam was made entirely from fruit, better for you than other brands of jam, and generally very high quality, had been completely lost in amongst the humour of the comic book theme. He also said that labels, the factory I'd chosen was too expensive, and that he didn't like all the flavours I'd made. So basically everything I'd just spent 6 months working on had to be thrown in the bin, and I started all over again. So I travelled around a whole load more factories, and eventually convinced another one to work with me. The designers and I sat down and had a really good think about who we were trying to communicate with. Who was going to buy Superjam? We clarified to ourselves there wasn't kids and teenagers who may well have found the comic book theme funny, but it was adults, and we'd have a matter of seconds to communicate to them that Superjam was better for them than other brands of jam. So having taken that new approach, the designers came up with a set of labels that we were really happy with, and a website that looked pretty cool. We even put a blog on the website that I was planning to update every few days with my news and stories, and all of that captured the imagination of Waitrose. And they agreed to launch Superjam in most of their stores in March this year, which was accompanied by extensive media coverage. I found myself being interviewed by newspapers in Taiwan to radio stations in Canada, and at one point was giving over 20 interviews a day. Anyway, in order to capitalise on all of that, I decided to travel around the country visiting the big Waitrose stores. I went to about 40, handing out samples, signing jars of jam, and discussing jam making with tens of thousands of old women. So, needless to say, the products flew off the shelves, and we've now sold about 200,000 jars. Following the success of Superjam and Waitrose, Tesco, one of the biggest supermarkets in the world, got in touch and asked if they too could stock the range. 3 phone calls later, and without even needing to meet with them, Tesco agreed to launch Superjam in 300 of their stores a couple of weeks ago. And again, that's been a huge success and covered extensively in the media. As a result of this runaway success, I've been gratefully received a number of awards. I won't talk about all of them, but for example, last week I had to go to Chicago for the Global Student Entrepreneur Awards, and as the name suggests, that's a worldwide competition for students who run their own businesses. All the other students were sort of running .com businesses and really high-tech inventions and all sorts of things. I was there with the jam. And so it ended up winning. That was great. Thank you. So from the point of view of sales, media coverage, and even winning awards, the business has been a major success. But as is always the case, there have been a number of disasters along the way. Probably the best example of which was the closure of the factory that up until recently I'd been using to make Superjam. That was as a result of a takeover by a bigger company, and meant that I had to really quickly figure out how to move production from one site to another. Although that was something of a challenge and could have resulted in disaster, it meant that I was able to find a better factory, and so Superjam is now being produced in one of the most efficient jam plants in Europe, and we're in a really strong position to grow the business. So thinking about the future, Superjam's now in Waitrose and Tesco, and I've met with Asda and Sainsbury's and all the other supermarkets, and they're all very keen on it. Thinking about my career in the future, I hope to develop other products in different food categories that have perhaps been in decline or have gone out of favour, particularly products that are unhealthy, and I want to try and reinvigorate them, make them healthier and more modern and so on. I've had help and advice from a lot of people to do all of this, other entrepreneurs, my university and so on. I think mentorship's a really important concept for young entrepreneurs. Starting my own business is something that's given me a lot of satisfaction. I've had a huge amount of fun doing, and I spend a lot of time encouraging other young people to give it a shot. So I regularly kind of talk at schools and that kind of thing. So just to kind of summarise, it's been a big success and a big adventure. But for me, the exciting thing is thinking about what to do next. So thank you.
Brilliant.